There is a moment you probably know well. You are sitting in a crowded restaurant, and the sound of forks scraping plates, the overlapping conversations, the laughter from the table 3 seats over, the bass from the music speaker above your head, it all starts to press in on you. Not loud enough for anyone else to complain, not loud enough to be called a problem, but loud enough that something inside you starts pulling away. You feel yourself go quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because the noise has taken up all the space where your words used to live. You smile, you nod, you pretend everything is fine, and somewhere beneath all of that, a small version of you is covering their ears, wishing it would all just stop. That feeling, that exact, specific, almost embarrassing feeling, that is where this begins. You have probably spent a long time thinking you were too sensitive, too much, too easily rattled by things that other people seem to breeze through without even noticing. Someone slams a cabinet in the next room, and your whole body flinches. A child starts crying in the grocery store, and you feel something tighten in your chest that takes 20 minutes to release. A group chat explodes with notifications, and even though you muted it, you can still feel the weight of it sitting there, unread, like a small stone in your shoe that you cannot quite shake out. You have probably tried to explain this to someone before, and watched their face go slightly blank, slightly polite, the way faces do when they are waiting for you to say something that makes sense to them. And so you stopped explaining. You learned to say, "I'm just tired," instead. It was easier, it was safer, and it was only half a lie. But here is what is true. The noise was never just noise. The sensitivity you carry, the way sound lands on you differently than it seems to land on others, it did not appear out of nowhere. It was not a factory defect. It was not a personality flaw you developed out of laziness or weakness. It grew, quietly, over time, in the spaces between loud moments that no one else thought to name. Think about where you grew up. Think about the emotional texture of the rooms you spent the most time in as a child. Were they rooms where you had to be constantly alert, where the tone of a voice could shift the entire atmosphere in 3 seconds flat, where you learned to read the air before you read the room, because reading the air was the only thing that kept you safe? Were you the child who noticed everything, felt everything, filed everything away behind a calm face, because that calm face was the thing you offered the adults around you in exchange for peace? If any part of that lands even a little, then you already know more about your noise sensitivity than any diagnostic label could ever tell you. Because what happened in those early rooms, in those early years, is that your nervous system learned a very specific lesson. It learned that stimulation means something is about to happen. That sound is not just sound. That noise is information. That when things get loud, you need to be ready. Your body learned to treat sensory input the way a soldier treats movement in the dark, not neutrally, not casually, but with attention, with vigilance, with the quiet, exhausting posture of someone who is always prepared for something to go wrong. Psychologists have a name for this state of constant alert. They call it hypervigilance, but forget the word for a moment. What it actually feels like is this: you are never fully off. Even in a quiet room, part of you is listening. Even in a peaceful moment, part of you is waiting. You cannot fully rest because resting, real resting, feels like leaving your post. And leaving your post, somewhere deep in your body's memory, still feels dangerous. Hypervigilance is not the same as anxiety, though they often travel together. Anxiety is about the future, what might happen, what could go wrong. Hypervigilance is about the present moment. What is happening right now? What am I sensing? What does this mean? What do I need to do? It is a survival mechanism, and once it probably saved you in ways you are not even fully aware of. But survival mechanisms do not always know when the danger has passed. That is the quiet tragedy of it. What saved you then can imprison you now. The same nervous system that protected you as a child is still running the same program, still scanning, still interpreting loud voices as threats, still reading a slammed door as the beginning of something you need to prepare for. The environment changed. You grew up. You left those rooms. But the nervous system did not receive the memo. It is still doing the job it was assigned decades ago with perfect faithfulness, even though the job description no longer applies. Take a breath here. Sit with that for just a moment. Because there is something important in recognizing that you are not broken. You are not defective. You are, in a very real sense, someone whose body learned its lessons too well. Your sensitivity is not a malfunction. It is the echo of a past that asked too much of you before you had the tools to handle it. And this shows up in your life in ways that go far beyond flinching at noise. It shows up in how you move through social spaces. You are probably the person who arrives at parties already calculating the exit, already mapping the quietest corner of the room, already aware on some level that at some point during this evening, the stimulation will cross a threshold, and you will need to disappear somewhere to breathe. You might love people deeply. You might be genuinely warm, genuinely curious, genuinely present in one-on-one conversations. But put you in a room where 5 conversations are happening at once, and something in you begins to close down like a flower in the wrong weather. It shows up in relationships. The people closest to you may have learned, sometimes consciously, sometimes not, to modulate their volume around you. Or they may not have learned that at all, and you have absorbed the difference in silence, because asking for quiet felt like asking for too much. Because somewhere inside you there is still a voice that says, your needs are inconvenient, your limits are a burden. If you ask for stillness, you will be too much to love. It shows up in how you work. You might struggle in open plan offices, not because you are lazy or easily distracted, but because the auditory landscape of those spaces is, for your nervous system, the equivalent of trying to read a book while someone is slowly turning up the heat in a room. You can manage it for a while, you can push through, but by the end of the day, you are not just tired the way other people are tired. You are depleted in a way that is harder to name, a kind of bone-deep exhaustion that sleep does not always fix, because the depletion is not physical, it is neurological. It is the cost of spending 8 hours managing your own sensory experience, while pretending that nothing unusual is happening. And then there is the loneliness of it. The strange, specific loneliness of knowing that the world is turned up too loud for you in ways you cannot fully explain, and that most people around you cannot hear what you hear, cannot feel what you feel, and would not know where to begin to understand it even if they wanted to. Sometimes I wonder if I was just built for a quieter world than this one. That thought has crossed your mind, maybe more than once. Here is the emotional truth of it, the thing that sits underneath all the coping and the explaining and the pretending. You are tired, not just tired of noise, tired of managing yourself around noise, tired of apologizing for needing quiet, tired of feeling like your sensitivity is a problem to be solved rather than a truth to be honored, tired of the gap between the way you experience the world and the way you are expected to experience it. You have spent so much energy trying to meet the world at its volume, trying to turn yourself up to match it, trying to be louder, less reactive, less sensitive, more normal. And every time you have succeeded, even a little, something small and true inside you has gone a little quieter. That is the cost no one talks about. Not the noise itself, the self-erasure required to survive it without complaint. Sit with that. There is no rush to move past it. Because what you are carrying is not just sensory sensitivity. What you are carrying is the accumulated weight of a world that did not know how to hold you at your actual volume. A world that handed you the message, early and often, that being affected by things was a weakness, that flinching was embarrassing, that needing quiet was needy, that the way you were wired was something to overcome rather than something to understand. And you believed it. Of course you believed it. You were young, you did not have the framework to push back. You just absorbed the message and built your life around it. Minimize the sensitivity, maximize the endurance, never let them see how much it costs you. Psychologists sometimes talk about something called emotional suppression, the practice of experiencing an emotion fully on the inside while presenting a neutral or functional face to the outside world. Research, including work by scholars at Stanford University, suggests that people who suppress emotions regularly tend to experience higher levels of physiological stress, even when their outward behavior shows none of it. The body knows, even when the face does not. For you, that suppression has likely not just been emotional, it has been sensory. You have been suppressing your sensory experience, pushing down the flinch, swallowing the overwhelm, managing the internal volume while the external volume keeps rising. And you have done this so well for so long that it may have started to feel normal. This is just who I am, you think. I just get overwhelmed sometimes. I just need a little more downtime than other people. But what if it is not just a quirk? What if it is a message? Here's the thing about your sensitivity. It is not random. It is not arbitrary. It is specific. The sounds that hit you hardest are often not the loudest ones. They are the ones that carry something. A raised voice that sounds like an argument you grew up inside. The sound of someone crying in public that pulls at something you were never allowed to feel yourself. The low, constant drone of a television left on in another room that reminds your body, on a level below thought, of a childhood home where the television was always on, and the television meant that the adults were somewhere else, and somewhere else meant you were on your own. Your nervous system is not just processing sound. It is processing memory. It is processing meaning. It is processing everything it once learned about what noise means, what it signals, what it requires of you. That is not weakness. That is a nervous system doing its job with extraordinary loyalty to a past you have already survived. The question now, the real question, is not how to become less sensitive. The question is, what would it mean to stop fighting your own wiring? Not performing toughness, not white-knuckling your way through loud rooms, not apologizing every time you need to step outside for air, but actually, genuinely, beginning to treat your sensitivity as a legitimate part of who you are, a part that deserves accommodation, a part that has something to teach you if you are willing to listen. This is where some people encounter the concept of sensory processing sensitivity, a trait identified by psychologist Elaine Aron in the 1990s. Roughly 15 to 20% of the population carries this trait, which means 1 in every 5 or 6 people processes sensory and emotional information more deeply than average. They notice more. They feel more. They need more time to decompress after high stimulation environments. They are not malfunctioning. They are processing more data than the average nervous system, and that takes more energy. But knowing the name does not on its own change anything. What changes things is something slower and more personal. It starts with giving yourself permission to be honest about what you need. Not performing the needs, not over-explaining them, not building an elaborate apology around them. Just, this is what helps me. This is what costs me. This is the kind of environment in which I function, and the kind in which I begin to disappear. I am allowed to need quiet. That is not a character flaw. That is just the truth of who I am. Something in you might resist that. The part of you that was trained early to see your needs as inconvenient might push back hard. That part is not your enemy. It is just very old. It is doing the job it learned to do in rooms that no longer exist. The work, if you can call it work, is less about fixing yourself and more about becoming a compassionate witness to yourself. Noticing when you are overwhelmed without judging the overwhelm. Asking what you need before you hit the wall, rather than after. Learning to recognize the early signs, the slight tension behind your eyes, the way your attention starts to fragment, the way you begin to feel like you are watching yourself from a slight distance rather than living inside your own experience. These are not failures. These are signals. Your body communicating in the only language it has. And slowly, the relationship between you and your sensitivity can begin to shift. Not from sensitivity to toughness. That is not the goal. But from sensitivity as burden to sensitivity as information. From something you manage in secret to something you acknowledge with a measure of grace. I used to think something was wrong with me. Now I think I just feel the world differently. There is no dramatic moment where that shift happens. It tends to be quiet, barely noticeable at first, a moment where you say, without apology, I need to step outside for a minute, and you do not spend the next 20 minutes analyzing whether that was acceptable. A moment where you arrange your environment in a way that supports you, and you feel something that is not quite pride but is adjacent to it. A recognition that you are allowed to take up space in the world on your own terms. This is not about retreating from life. It is not about building walls so high that nothing can touch you. You do not want that. Part of what makes you extraordinary, and you are extraordinary, is that things do touch you. The world gets through. Beauty lands differently for you. Music does something to you that you cannot fully explain to people who do not experience it the same way. A particular quality of evening light, the silence after rain, a stranger being kind to another stranger in a way no one else seemed to notice. You notice, you always notice. That noticing is the other side of the sensitivity, the side that does not get talked about when people are focused on the overwhelm, the side that makes you, when the noise finally clears, one of the most present people in any room. You do not need to be fixed. You need to be understood. First by yourself, and then, gently, selectively, by the people you choose to let close. And maybe, in time, the crowded restaurant becomes something you can leave without shame. Maybe the group chat becomes something you can ignore without guilt. Maybe the slammed cabinet in the next room becomes something you can hear without your whole body tensing, because you have spent enough time in quiet rooms, learning that you are safe now, that the noise does not mean what it once meant, that your body is allowed to rest. Or maybe not yet. Maybe that is still a long way off, and that is allowed too. You do not have to be healed to be worthy of rest. You do not have to be fixed to deserve quiet. You do not have to explain your sensitivity to anyone who has never had to navigate the world with every nerve ending a little closer to the surface than average. You are allowed to be exactly as you are, right now, in this particular moment. Somewhere, in a restaurant you have not been to yet, there is a corner table, the one near the window, away from the kitchen, away from the speaker. The light is soft there. The noise is manageable there. And when you walk in and spot it, you will feel something small and specific. Relief, not because the world got quieter, but because you finally gave yourself permission to look for the corner. That is not a compromise. That is not retreat. That is someone who knows themselves well enough to ask for what they need. Someone who has stopped apologizing for the shape of their own soul. The world is loud. It has always been loud. And some of us were simply made to hear more of it, to feel more of it, to carry more of it in our bodies without being able to explain why. That is not a tragedy. It is not a gift either. Not always. Not straightforwardly. It is just the particular truth of being you. And the quietest, most courageous thing you can do with that truth is to stop running from it, to sit with it, the way you might sit with a friend who is tired, not trying to cheer them up, not trying to solve them, just staying close, present, willing. The noise will come again. It always does. But somewhere between the next loud room and the next quiet moment you carve out for yourself, you are learning something that cannot be unlearned. You are learning that the most important kind of quiet is the one you finally find inside yourself, even when everything around you is still turned all the way up.